3 days after giving birth to my daughter at a military hospital, I realized not a single person from my husband's family had come to see us. No flowers, no calls, no congratulations. I told myself they simply needed time. But the moment I carried my baby through my front door, I found a beautifully wrapped gift box waiting on the porch. On top was one handwritten note: "Don't make a scene." I smiled until I opened it. My hand started shaking so badly, I could barely breathe. Within minutes, I was calling 911 because someone wanted me terrified, and they had finally crossed a line. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old, and until the day my daughter was born, I believed surviving military deployments had prepared me for almost anything life could throw at me. I was wrong. Nothing in my Army career compared to the quiet heartbreak of realizing the people who should have welcomed my child never wanted either of us. I served as a logistics officer, where planning ahead and staying calm under pressure became second nature. That's how I met my husband, Daniel Carter. He was kind, steady, and the first person who made me believe I didn't have to earn love by proving myself every single day. When I became pregnant with our first baby, Daniel was away on an extended assignment for several months. We counted down the days until he returned, dreaming about holding our daughter together. The only shadow hanging over those dreams was his mother, Linda. From the day we announced our engagement, she treated me like an outsider. She smiled politely in front of Daniel, but whenever we were alone, she questioned whether a woman in uniform could ever be a proper wife or mother. She insisted babies needed mothers who stayed home, not officers who followed military orders. Daniel always defended me, but Linda never changed. 3 days before we were discharged from the military hospital, our beautiful daughter finally entered the world healthy and perfect. Friends from my unit visited. Nurses celebrated with us. Daniel never left my side, but not one person from his family walked through that hospital door. No flowers, no phone calls, no congratulations. I told myself they simply needed time. I had no idea that our real welcome home was already waiting on our front porch. The drive home from the military hospital should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Daniel smiled every time he glanced in the rearview mirror at our daughter sleeping peacefully in her car seat. I kept reaching back just to touch her tiny blanket, making sure she was really there. After everything we'd dreamed about, we were finally bringing our little girl home. As Daniel pulled into the driveway, something immediately caught my attention. A large white gift box sat neatly beside our front door, wrapped with a silver ribbon. It looked expensive, almost elegant, like something from a luxury baby boutique. Resting on top was a small cream-colored envelope with my name written across it in careful handwriting. I smiled for the first time all morning. "Maybe your family finally decided to surprise us," I said. Daniel looked uncertain, but nodded. "I hope so." Balancing the baby carefully against my shoulder, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten sentence: "Don't make a scene." My smile disappeared. Daniel frowned. "That's strange." Trying to convince myself it was some awkward joke, I untied the ribbon and slowly lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was one of our wedding photographs. Someone had torn it neatly down the middle, separating Daniel from me. Underneath it lay our daughter's hospital announcement card, even though we had never mailed one to anyone outside the hospital. Beneath that was a folded note: "Some families are better off without outsiders." Every bit of warmth left my body. "Daniel," I whispered. His face turned pale as he looked inside the box. Without saying another word, he pulled out his phone while I stepped back onto the porch, clutching our baby tightly. 10 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived, photographed everything, and quietly asked the question that made my stomach tighten. "Does anyone in your family have a reason to intimidate you?" The deputy collected the box, photographed every inch of our porch, and promised a detective would contact us the next morning. Before leaving, he suggested we avoid discussing the incident publicly until they understood who had delivered it. I agreed, but the silence inside our house felt heavier than any conversation. That night, after feeding our daughter, I finally drifted asleep on the living room couch. At exactly 2:17 a.m., my phone rang. No caller ID. I answered without thinking. The line stayed silent. Then someone whispered, "You should have listened." The call disconnected. Daniel immediately checked every door and window while I held our daughter against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. The next morning, he canceled everything except the baby's pediatric appointment and called a security company. By evening, cameras covered every entrance to our home. For 2 peaceful days, nothing happened. Then I noticed the same dark SUV parked across the street. It remained there for almost an hour before quietly driving away. The following afternoon, it returned. This time, Daniel saw it too. The detectives obtained footage from neighboring security cameras and compared license plate images captured before the vehicle disappeared. The registration eventually led them to someone connected to Daniel's extended family, not his parents, but a cousin who had attended nearly every family gathering for years. That discovery made the anonymous notes feel far less random. As I sat at our kitchen table replaying every uncomfortable family dinner in my mind, another memory surfaced. During my pregnancy, Linda had smiled at me and said, "Some women aren't welcomed into a family. They simply marry into one." At the time, I dismissed it as another cruel remark. Now it sounded different. Daniel lowered his eyes before quietly saying the words neither of us wanted to hear. "I think we need to talk to my mother." The next afternoon, Daniel asked if I was strong enough to visit his parents with the detectives nearby if things became difficult. I looked down at our daughter sleeping peacefully in her carrier and realized I was no longer making decisions only for myself. When we arrived, Linda opened the door with a practiced smile that disappeared the moment she saw the detective's badge. "We only have a few questions," the detective said calmly. Linda folded her arms. "I don't know anything about a box." "I didn't say anything about a box," the detective replied. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it was enough. Inside the living room, Daniel asked the question that had been haunting both of us. "Mom, did you know someone was trying to scare Emily?" She looked at him, then at me, before lowering her eyes. "I thought it was just supposed to send a message." The room went completely still. "What message?" Daniel asked. Linda hesitated. "My sister's son, your cousin Nathan, said if Emily felt unwelcome, maybe you'd spend more time with your real family instead of shutting us out." I stared at her in disbelief. "You knew?" "I never told him to leave those things," she whispered quickly. "I thought he meant flowers with a note, something harmless." When I found out what he'd actually delivered, I panicked. The detective quietly took notes, while Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. "So, instead of warning us," he said, "you stayed silent." Tears filled Linda's eyes. I was ashamed. The detective explained that surveillance footage and phone records already connected Nathan to the anonymous deliveries. They simply needed everyone's statements to complete the investigation. As we stood to leave, the detective looked at us and spoke carefully. "This wasn't a random prank. Someone planned every step to frighten your family." For the first time, Daniel stopped defending his mother. He simply walked beside me, protecting the family we had created together. 2 days later, the detectives asked Daniel and me to come to the sheriff's office. By then, I had barely slept. Every unexpected sound still made me check on our daughter first. I hated feeling afraid inside my own home, but I reminded myself that fear would not make decisions for me anymore. The lead detective placed a folder on the table. "We've completed most of the investigation." Nathan had admitted everything. He confessed that after hearing Linda complain for years that I had taken Daniel away, he convinced himself he was protecting the family. He tracked our hospital discharge date through a relative who had innocently mentioned it after sending congratulations online. He prepared the box, the anonymous notes, and the late-night phone calls, hoping I would become so frightened that I would ask Daniel to move away or distance himself from his relatives. "I never intended to hurt anyone," Nathan insisted during his recorded statement. The detective answered firmly. "You intended to intimidate a new mother in her own home. That's serious enough." Daniel sat quietly beside me, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles move beneath his skin. Finally, he turned toward me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have recognized how long you've been carrying this burden alone." I squeezed his hand. "This isn't your fault. But what happens next is our choice." That evening, Linda came to our house without warning. She stood on the porch holding no gifts this time, only tears. "I spent years believing I was protecting my son," she said quietly. "Instead, I nearly destroyed his family." I listened without interrupting. When she finally asked whether I could forgive her, I answered honestly, "I hope you find peace, Linda. But my responsibility is protecting my daughter, not repairing the past." Then I gently closed the door, knowing some boundaries are the greatest act of love a parent can give their child. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. The investigation reached its conclusion, and for the first time since bringing our daughter home, I could hear something other than fear inside my own mind. One evening, after rocking our little girl to sleep, Daniel joined me on the back porch. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Not just for what happened, but for every time I hoped things would get better instead of seeing them for what they were." I rested my head against his shoulder. "You believed people could change," I replied. "There's nothing wrong with that." He nodded. "But now my first responsibility is the family we've built." Those words stayed with me. Motherhood had changed the way I measured love. Love wasn't pretending everything was fine to keep the peace. Love meant creating a home where our daughter would never question whether she was safe, wanted, or enough. We changed our routines, strengthened our privacy, and surrounded ourselves with people who celebrated our little family instead of competing with it. For the first time, I understood something my adoptive grandmother once told me. Peace isn't found by fixing every broken relationship. Sometimes peace begins the moment you stop carrying responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. A month later, I received one final letter from Linda. There were no excuses this time, only a sincere apology and a promise to respect every boundary we had set. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and chose not to answer. Some endings don't need another conversation. That evening, I watched my daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib and realized the cycle had finally ended with me. She would grow up knowing love without fear, discipline without humiliation, and family without conditions. Because real strength isn't teaching children to survive cruelty. It's making sure they never have to.